the country was more rural than it is today. Today we have the large cities, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, and all of this. Back then, many people were in the rural areas, like I was. I lived about 10 miles from the city of Pensacola, Florida, and we had 10 acres in our house. There were 11 kids in my family, and so life was a little bit different. We had no phones. You all have a cell phone in your pocket, I imagine, right now. And we had no phones at all. Electricity was limited in my family. We didn't get electricity until 1941, and there was no airplanes big liners to travel. You travel mainly by bus or train if you were going out of town or going somewhere, and there were no satellites to send messages or to do texting or anything of that sort. That wasn't available to us. We just had to make do with what we had, and most of us had farm animals and some a little farm work that we had to do, and many times we had to get up before we went to school and take care of the animals, feeding them and doing all of that. Any of you have that trouble? Besides taking care of the dogs, what do you have?
I got horses.
Huh?
Horses.
Horses, okay. Some of you have horses, and that takes time. So you have in our family we had no running water. You will get up and turn the faucet on, and water comes out, and if it's put it a little farther and it's hot, and we had none of that. We had a pipe that would drive in the ground about 20 feet, and we'd get a hand pump and catch the water in a pitcher or whatever, or a glass or whatever we wanted to do. And that was the way that life was back in those days. We had no superstores that we could go in to and pick out the groceries or pick out the items that we wanted to and go out and pay for them. The stores didn't operate that way then. You went in and you talked to the clerk, and they went to the store, went to the shelf and got what you wanted, came back to the counter and paid for it. Any of you watch the Andy Griffith things? You say I have a little idea of what they do. The drugstores, she would take care of the item and take the money and put it in the registration. That's the way we were. While I was in high school, we did odd jobs for spending money. We didn't know what an allowance was. We had to earn our spending money, and we would cut grass, cut lawns, and cut weeds and things of this sort. We did this not by pulling the crank and starting up the engine, but we had a blade that was about so wide, stopped on a handle, and we sat there and that way. And we did that, and we got 25 cents an hour for that. Took a long time to get any money, but of course that wasn't all the story. Back then, the average income for a family was $2,300 a year. You make that, your family makes that more than in 1 week, and some of you in 1 day, almost. A new car, what does a new car cost now? Anybody have an idea? You haven't gotten a new car yet, huh? you're over $20,000 or $40,000 or whatever. Back then, you could buy one for $1,025, a new car. And there wasn't many cars to be bought. You had Ford or Chevrolet, or maybe a Dodge, or something of the sort. And a loaf of bread, today, a loaf of bread was about $3, something like that. Back then it was 9 cents. Gasoline was 15 cents a gallon. Now we pay $4 a gallon. So things were different, but they were balanced out by the income and the amount that you paid for things. Things were different in those days for all of us. Now, I was living in Pensacola, Florida, and Pensacola is a Navy town, naval aviation. They train the pilots. Any of you familiar with that? Pilots are trained in, maybe some of your parents or grandparents were trained in Pensacola. They trained the pilots and the support industry for aircraft there. The pilots were trained in a little biplane, it was yellow, and it was two wings on it, four wings, upper and lower wings. And there were two cockpits, one for the instructor and one for the student. And then when the student became trained, he had a solo flight, and he went up by himself in the single thing. There were little landing fields all over the area, and they weren't paved or anything. They were usually grass, just open field with these little planes. They weren't very fast like the jets were. We didn't have jets in that time. That was propeller-driven planes. And so this was all before World War II started. Word came to us that, we didn't have television. You couldn't turn the television on and see what was going on in different parts of the world. There were no satellites or anything of that sort. We just had a radio. Everything came in by radio or newspaper or a few magazines that we were able to get. And so we weren't up to date all the time, but the war started in Europe, and we were aware that there was a war going on, but the United States was not involved in it actively, though we were producing materials and sending them to the war zone. But life was going on pretty well normally until Pearl Harbor, December the 7th in 1941. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and just about wiped out our Pacific Fleet. Prior to that time, we were sending materials over to Europe. By the way, what happens when they want to send a troop, a whole troop of fighters now? How do they send them over? They put them on a plane, don't they? And they put all the material that they're going to use, including the tanks and so forth, on these big planes, and they take off and just a few hours they're on the field. Back then, when troops were transported, they were transported by train, sometimes by bus, and if they were going overseas, they were by ship. And it took days and sometimes longer, weeks, even to get on the field to do the fighting. It was a slow process compared to what it is today. News just came out yesterday, I think it was, that we're sending more troops overseas into Iraq. And they just will go aboard the plane and their tanks and material and all of the paraphernalia will be loaded and they'll take off, and momentarily they're over there ready to go to start fighting. In World War II, trying to kind of change things a little bit for us, I was a senior in high school, and there was a draft of warriors that was started late 18. I was 17. And 18, you had to register for the draft. And then they gave you a number, and you may be called up. You were 1F or all the way to 4F. 4F was you were disabled and you couldn't go to war. And 1F was you were subject to be called anytime. I had an older brother that was drafted in August of 1941, 1940, I believe, yeah. In August of 1940, he was in the Army. And then I had another brother that joined the Navy. And since I was in the Navy town, and all I knew was Navy people, I decided I didn't want to go in the Army. And so I rushed out, and they had posters like this all over, you know. I want you to join the Navy or join the service in some way. So I rushed out, and just a few days before I was 18 and had to register for the draft, I enlisted in the Navy. And at that time, it was a 3-year, you could have a minority hitch if they were just 17 for 3 years. And so that was 1943, January of 1943. And you guys, I'll put that down on your notes. January 1943, I joined the Navy. And the first thing they did when I joined, they swore me in, of course, and gave me a health check and so forth. And then they sent me to boot camp in San Diego, all the way from Pensacola, Florida, out to San Diego. And there's the San Diego boot camp that I was in there. You closer, back there you can't see, but there's a bunch of men. Not men, but
it's upside down.
guys.
You have it upside down. JD, can you have it upside down?
Huh?
The photo was upside down. Can you show the photo again? The photo was upside down.
Let me get it upside.
Was that like 200 guys? How many people were in your boot camp?
Yeah, I'm in there somewhere.
All right. Good job. Looks like 200 guys.
Yeah. What was the boot camp for? It was to learn the Navy rules and regulations, and to build your stamina, and to be checked for medical fields. I spent, my teeth were bad. I had a lot of cavity, and I spent a whole week in the dental office getting my cavities filled. Every day I get up and go to the dental office. So that was life back then. We did a lot of marching, drilling, turn, left turn, right turn, backward, march and so forth. All of that was there, and then we would go on long hikes, sometimes out of San Diego, maybe down to Mission Beach, and we made some 20-mile hikes. And one of them, went to they had a swimming pool, and they had a high tower. It must have been about 20, 30 feet high. And they took us over there, and we've had to jump off of that into the pool. Anybody know what that was for? What training was that?
Jump off.
Huh?
To jump off a boat. I don't know.
Louder, I can't,
To jump off a boat.
jump off a boat, yeah. That was, because you may be on a aircraft carrier, and it was attacked, and, you had to jump off 100 feet or so maybe. And so, they were training us to not be afraid to jump into the water. If you were afraid, they march you to the edge there, and somebody would give you a push. And you had to go anyway. You don't know anything about that, being pushed, do you? Okay. Then after boot camp, they transferred me to, in boot camp, you could get, put in for a school of training. Boot camp was just basic training of all the regulations and so forth that the Navy had, and rules and regulations that you had to follow. And then from there, you could choose a school of career for your career in the Navy. Sometimes you got your choice, and sometimes you didn't. Most of the time you didn't. And many times you just were assigned to duty somewhere, most of the time on a ship. I served 3 years in the Navy, and I never served aboard ship. I was very fortunate. I was always land-based. I was a land Navy. I have a friend now is my age, and he was joined at the same time I was. And from boot camp, he was transferred to a ship, and he never got off the ship. He moved from one ship to the other. When he was out in the Pacific in the war, and when his ship got torpedoed, they put him on another ship, and he was a gunner on the ship. And so I was fortunate to be able to just stay into a land-based. First of all, I chose aviation mechanic, because in Pensacola, when I got out of high school graduation, I went to work for a few months before I was 18. I went to work for the Naval Air Station as an aviation metalsmith apprentice. They had a program. Because, see, by then we were into the war. And you could, they were training people for various things at the Naval Air Station. And so I was working as an apprentice program for aviation metalsmith. And they paid me well. I think I was making 45 cents an hour, full-time job. That was better than the job I left, but part-time job, summer job I was taking while I was in school. I got $13 a week. I was delivery boy. We didn't have McDonald's and things of this sort. We had other types of work that we did for spending money. Anyway, I put in for aviation training, and they sent me to Norman, Oklahoma. Now, can you imagine, here the Navy was in San Diego, I was in San Diego, and they sent me all the way back to Oklahoma to train for the Navy in the middle of the country. And at Oklahoma, Norman, there were two bases. There was one they called South Base, and one they called North Base. South Base was for the training of the various trades of aviation, and North Base were training for pilots. And so I was sent to South Base, and I spent 7 months there training for aviation machinists. What happened is you train all as a mechanic. You had to know the whole plane, all the engines, the mechanical, and all of the wings and tails and everything else, how to fix them. And that's what we spent a few months doing this. Now, right at a week before I graduated in August, I was sent to the hospital. I was playing baseball and bruised my finger, and it became infected, and I had a skin graft, and so I spent 3 months in the hospital. But they went ahead and graduated me with the class, and I spent the class went various other assignments, and I was assigned to the hospital as an outpatient because I just had the finger wrapped up, and I was able to get around. In November, I got individual orders. In November of 1944. 44. The orders were to Long Beach, California. I went by myself, by train. They didn't fly me out there. They weren't flying passengers. You had to get a train. So I came to Long Beach and worked in the O&R in Terminal Island Naval Air Station. Any of you familiar with Long Beach? Okay, across the bay there's a little island off of San Pedro, and there was a naval air station there it's not there anymore now. And that's where I spent 13 months in what they called O&R, overhaul and repair. Overhaul and repair, O&R of aircraft. And the job mainly was to get new planes that were shipped into us, and we would equip them for saltwater transport. We called it pickling, because planes were normally a lot of aluminum, and salt water caused aluminum to corrode, and so we had to fix them so we can strap them on to different ships and send them over to the war zone. This is the ships that, there's the planes that we had. Are you familiar with those? They're all propeller driven. They're not, no jets. We didn't have jets at that time.
Those are not Mustangs. Those aren't P-51 Mustangs. What are those? Are those A-46s? What kind of?
Okay, these, I'll read them for you.
Some of us like planes.
Bombers, it was called TBF Avenger.
Oh, the Avenger. That was big.
TBF, and then the Dauntless SBD.
Dauntless. That was big.
That was a two-seater. The Dauntless was a two-seater. The Avenger was a three-seater. It had a gunner and a navigator on there, and the pilot. And the others, the Corsair.
Corsair was big.
With that? F4U.
That's a big one, yes.
That's the one that had the gull wings. Some of you have seen pictures of that one, I'm sure. And then there was F6F. They were called the Hellcat.
Oh, Hellcat. That was famous in World War II.
That was a dive bomber, a dive fighter. I mean, a fighter. The Corsair and the Hellcat were fighters, And the Avenger and Dauntless were dive bombers. They would had bombs strapped to their wings, and they would dive and release the bomb. Then one was the Catalina. And that was a patrol boat. It had wide, long wings and was slow. It would travel about 150 miles an hour, 125, and it would patrol the coastline. We had a lot of coastline to patrol, and this is a picture of the trainer, one of the trainers. It was a more modern trainer than double wing.
Mr. Andrews, Mr. Andrews, were you guys really afraid of the Japanese attacking? You were in Long Beach. Were you really afraid of the Japanese attacking us?
Were you?
Well, you were in Long Beach. Did you have any fear of the Japanese? No, I'm asking. I know. I'm asking you. Did you have any fear of the Japanese coming to Terminal Island where you were?
They did. They could. They had submarines off the coast.
So you were looking for them.
Yeah, we were looking for them. The actual patrol was patrolling, looking for submarines. In Pensacola, even before the war, we entered the war, before Pearl Harbor, we had about 20 or 30 miles of coastline there in Pensacola that the patrolmen that were assigned to patrol that and watch for people that may come in from submarines and invade the country. And so, other than that, back then, my life was pretty well normal. So I was back to Long Beach, and it was during this time that FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president, died. I think he died about in March of 1944. And Vice President Harry Truman became the president. And he was zeroed in on the presidency. And then in May, because we had the invasion of Europe, Germany surrendered in 1944. I think I'm on the right date. Am I right?
Yep.
And
You lived it, but
Germany
that's the history.
And so we were diverted the war to the Pacific mainly with the Japanese. Now, I had a brother that was in the Navy. He's a little older than I was. And he was stationed in China. The Japanese had invaded China during this time, and they were all over China, and he was my brother was behind the Japanese lines, traveling around China, and well, I guess bribing the Chinese to give them information on the Japanese troops, where there were and how many there were, and what their equipment was, and so forth. And this was the forerunner of what we have now is the CIA. Any of you familiar with the CIA? Central Intelligence Agency. They gather intelligence all over the world, and they transport it to the military so they can plan military action all over the world. And he was in this for 2 years, traveling in China, gathering information on the Japanese. And I was sitting in Long Beach, going on Liberty. That's what we call free time. Every evening, going to Liberty, and going to a skating rink and going to movies and just, doing whatever, going to restaurants and things, and going to church. And at church, I met my wife. And, she nailed me in church. She proposed to me. No, I proposed to her. And we were married, and, what's a normal marriage year? How many years does normally that marriage happen? Oh, well, maybe each 60, well, that's pretty good. We were married 70 years before she died a year ago.
Oh.
And, that's a long time, that's a lifetime, isn't it? 70 years. And we had a great time. I'll tell you more what we did later after. She was a school teacher, but, that, is what we did. And when I went to Oklahoma, when I was in Oklahoma, I traveled into weekends going to Oklahoma City. Norman was about 20 miles from Oklahoma City, and I went to a church called Kellum Avenue Baptist Church. And I went there and I met some families. They were real good, and because they took us in as servicemen, I didn't get homesick. I was away from home. I'd never been away from home before, and I was away 13 months before I ever got back to visit my folks. And we did not have texting or cell phones that took pictures and transported them for them to see, so we can give them this thing. We had to write letters, and we couldn't send the letter right on. It went to the main office, and they censor it, and they would scratch out this or black out this